Okay, the first thing I wanted to go over, since we missed last week because of the storms, had to readjust the schedule for the rest of the class. Um, has anybody gotten your schedules in other classes? Okay. The plan, the unofficial plan is that we're going to continue classes through fall break, but that happens after session A, so we'll already be done when that happens. So I have a schedule made up for us to get all of the chapters covered with some review periods. It looks like the university is considering some Saturday classes that would be done in September online, so I can record some reviews or put up some review quizzes to help prepare you for the exam, because that's where we are losing contact time, is at the very end, right before the exam. So that's going to be my plan. And we just got to work with that. Does anybody have any? I've moved back the final exam. So group 2 will have it on the Wednesday, and group 1 will have it on the Friday at the end of session A. But that's on the Moodle page. I'm going to leave it up there for the rest of the semester. Okay. So today we're going to continue with the flow of food. We did a introduction to it before the week off. Now we're going to go through each step in the flow of food. So the first step is going to be purchasing the food, and we're going to make sure that we're purchasing it from approved, reputable suppliers. And what that means is that these people have been inspected by somebody, either a health department or the Food and Drug Administration or the USDA, where they hire a third-party person to come in and do an inspection for them. They're going to meet all the local, federal, state laws for handling food. What we want to do as a restaurant is make sure that they come with our deliveries on time, but at a time that's convenient for us. We wouldn't want them coming in at like 11:30 in the morning if we're serving lunch, because we're going to be busy in the kitchen preparing and serving lunch. So you want to do it like early in the morning or later in the like mid-afternoon before your dinner starts. So you want to have the staff make sure they have time to do inspections of the food and they can be correctly received, which we're going to learn about. Okay, so ideally, you have big enough staff that you can assign certain people to do receiving. In this building, in the far corner, we have a commissary. There are 2 people working in there. They handle all of the food that is received in this building. So they order everything and they receive it in the back. So they've been trained to follow food safety guidelines. They have to have a ServSafe certification, just like y'all do. And then as manager, I got to make sure they have the tools they need in order to do their jobs correctly. So there needs to be enough people to receive it promptly. You don't want food sitting around. You don't want to have one delivery come in that has milk and dairy products in it and have it sit out while another one comes in behind it. So the first step when you're receiving a delivery is to walk out and look at the delivery truck. Look into the back of it, make sure that it's clean. You want to inspect the deliveries immediately upon receipt. We're going to do a list of things as we receive them. Check and look at the items, make sure it is what you ordered, and then you're going to check the temperatures of specific items. So any of the TCS foods, if you have a large order, you can't check every single container, but you're just going to spot check, especially in the areas that would be considered warmer areas. Store them promptly after they're received. There's also a thing called key drop deliveries. I've never worked anywhere that did this, but a supplier is actually given a key to your building. You know that they're going to come in overnight. They're going to unload everything and put it away for you. When you do that, when your first staff comes in the morning, that's the first thing they have to do is check that delivery and inspect it. Of course, you have to have it from an approved source. It had to have been placed in the correct storage area. So frozen foods either in the freezer or in the cooler, if that's something that you want to thaw out immediately. Dairy products, eggs, that kind of thing in the cooler. They have to be protected from contamination while they're in storage. So you don't want anything dripping down on ready-to-eat food. They can't come in and be contaminated. And presented honestly. We'll talk about presenting food honestly a little bit later. So sometimes whenever an order comes in, you're going to have to reject some of the items on it. It could be that they're damaged, it's the wrong product. Especially with produce, it might be moldy or starting to go bad, and you don't want to pay for that. So you want to separate those items from the things that you're accepting. Tell the delivery person what's wrong with the item. Go ahead and make a notation of that. Usually it's done on the invoice. And you should have an internal document where you log that. Okay, here's an exception to whatever delivery it came in on and what the problem was. Okay, in the event of a recall of food, so sometimes you hear about this, like the biggest one in the last couple of years was the Bluebell ice cream, that all of their products ended up being pulled off the shelves. Okay, but if you have that in your restaurant, you have to identify that, okay, all of these products were recalled, and you're going to take them out of your inventory where your staff is getting food. And you're going to store it someplace separately. If we had to do that here, our freezer, our walk-in freezer or cooler is big enough where we could set aside a shelf that we could wrap up and say, okay, nobody touch this stuff. You want to label it to prevent it from being placed back into inventory. So if you can read the little sign they have on there, it says, do not use, do not discard. Tell everybody you have a recalled item. When you see that, don't use it. And then whoever made this, whoever sold this to you will give you information about how you get credit for it, whether you have to send it back or just send pictures of it and you can throw it away. Okay, so one of the things you have to do, check the temperature. When you're receiving meat, fish, or poultry, open up the container, take your thermometer, either your instant read bimetallic stem thermometer or a thermometer with an immersion probe. The name's escaping me. Anybody remember the name of the probe? Penetration probe. Okay. So you stick that into the food, make sure that it's the right temperature. What would the temperature for raw chicken, meat, or fish be if you're receiving it? Or any TCS food? Pardon me? 32? No, that's a little bit too cold. Where's the temperature danger zone start? 41. So it's got to be 41 or lower. 32 would be like ice cold. We have some things called reduced oxygen packaged food or modified atmospheric pressure, vacuum packed sous vide food. Um, most common thing you see is bacon packs. And you can hit just, instead of stabbing a probe through that pack, you can just sandwich 2 packs together and get a temperature. Other packaged foods, things like sour cream or milk, you actually want to open it up, take a clean and sanitized probe and put it inside of it and take the temperature. Now you're not going to be able to do that, like I said, for every container. But let's say I got a, let's see, heavy cream comes 12 quarts to a case. So there's like 3 rows of 4. I'm going to take the temperature of one of those quarts of cream. Which one is likely to be the warmest? In the middle, okay? That's because if it sat somewhere for a long time at room temperature, and then they stuck it into a cooler, it's going to get cool from the outside toward the center. So you're going to open it up from the center and check from the center. Okay, so our criteria, like I just said a few minutes ago, TCS food that is cold has to be received at 41 degrees or lower, unless otherwise specified. We have a couple of exceptions to this. Whenever you're getting in live shellfish, you don't really don't want to take the internal temperature. You don't want to crack open the product and then lose it by killing it. So you can take the air temperature, and it has to be lower than 45 degrees. And then once you receive it, you want to make sure that you store it so that it gets cooled down to below 41 within the 4 hours. If you're getting in shucked shellfish, has to be 45 degrees or lower, and then you have to, again, cool that down to the 41 within 4 hours. So you might get like a gallon of oysters that are shucked already. They can be as high as 45 degrees. Milk can be received up to 45 degrees. Shell eggs can be received at a temperature of up to 45 degrees. If you are receiving hot TCS food, say somebody else is preparing hot food for you, when you receive it, it has to be at least 135 degrees. So any of these TCS foods, you don't want them in the temperature danger zone when you receive them. When we get frozen food, it's got to be frozen solid. So there are signs that when you look at frozen food, whether it's been thawed and refrozen, if you have like water or liquid frozen at the bottom of the container, that's a really good indication that it was thawed, it released liquid, and then it was refrozen. Same thing with ice crystals. We've got 2 packages of shrimp here. The one on the right has ice crystals on it. Any kind of canned goods or bags of flour, boxes of rice, whatever it might be, anything that's packaged and has a tear, a hole, a puncture in the packaging, you want to reject that. Cans that have severe dents in the seam or body, missing labels, swollen or bulging ends, holes, leaks, rust, all of those things are reasons for you to send that back. Bulging cans could actually indicate the growth of bacteria inside the can. building up an air pressure as it creates carbon dioxide. The reduced oxygen packing. So like if you got a pack of bacon and you saw that it was starting to balloon up, that'd be a really good indication that it's bad. It would probably be discolored as well. Any kind of broken cartons or seals. You know how milk has that safety carton or safety lid on it? You got to make sure that's intact. If you have one that's been opened, it could have been tampered with. Bags, boxes that are dirty and discolored, showing any kind of signs of a leak, coming in contact with water. Any signs of pests or pest damage, you might find a bag that has a tear in it or might have a hole in it. Any kind of signs of tampering, like if the bag was opened and then taped shut, you shouldn't accept that kind of thing. Missing or incorrect labels, expired, used by, or expiration dates. When I check that, especially with dairy products, those things are all printed. You all know how to read those. Required documents. So if you're buying live shellfish, you should be receiving it with a shell stock identification tag. Has anybody ever gotten like a sack of oysters and see a tag on it? Yes, okay. So it's got to have that. That indicates when and where that shellfish was harvested. We're going to store the shellfish in their original container. Do not remove the shell stock tag until the last shellfish is used. So you want to keep that with the product so you can identify if there was a problem with it that came specifically from that tag. Then once all the product is used, you're going to write the date that the last of it was used. And then you're going to keep that on file for 90 days. That way it can always be traced back if somebody gets sick from the food that you were serving. Fish that's eaten raw or partially cooked. So if you're serving sashimi or sushi items that has raw fish in it, you need to receive documentation that shows the fish was correctly frozen before it came to you. It doesn't mean it necessarily comes to you frozen, but it has to have been held at a very low temperature for a certain period of time. And the paperwork should indicate that. And just like the shell stock tags, you want to keep that for 90 days. Same thing with farm-raised fish. Should have documentation stating the fish was raised to the Food and Drug Administration standards. You keep that again for 90 days. Okay, so when you're actually inspecting food and looking at it, anything that has mold on it, you want to get rid of that. Don't accept that. Things like blue cheese, camembert cheese, mold is a natural part of it. It's edible. So of course you would receive something like that. But the cheese that's shown in this photograph, that's a hard cheese, and it should not be moldy like that. Meat, fish, or poultry, if there's any of these slimy or sticky or dry, if it has soft flesh that leaves an imprint when you touch it, that means that it's old. Seafood, you can also, like if it comes head on, you can see the eyes. The eyes should be full and fresh. If they're sunken in and hollow, that's again indicating old food. You should be able to smell things as well. You'll learn when you're around food what smells fresh and good and what doesn't. It's usually not close. It's usually on one side or the other. Labeling food for use on site. So any item that's not in its original container must be labeled. So in this picture, we've got salt. Okay, that's not the container that it comes in. That's a Lexan container that we have in restaurants for storage. A lot of times it's easier to store it in a container like that instead of in a box, because you have to open the box and then it makes it more difficult to get in and out of it. Food labels have to clearly indicate the common name of the food or some type of statement that clearly, accurately identifies it. So salt is plenty good for this. It is not necessary to label food if it will clearly not be mistaken for another item. So I'm thinking if maybe you had like shelled peanuts, like I would probably label it anyway, but most people know that when they're looking at it that that's what it is. I'm not sure what you would mistake that for. If you are packaging food on site that you are going to sell, so if you have your own house salad dressing that you bottle up and you sell to people, you have to have the common name of the food or a statement that clearly identifies it, the quantity of the food. So just like you were selling anything in a supermarket, all of these laws apply to it. If it has 2 or more ingredients, the list of ingredients and sub-ingredients in descending order by weight. So whenever you look at an ingredient label on something, it's always got the highest quantity ingredient by weight measured first. You need to list artificial colors and flavors and chemical preservatives. Name and place of business of the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. And then any type of allergen, any of those big 8 allergens. Can anybody remember those, all 8 of those? Milk, soy, fish, shellfish, peanuts, tree nuts. I don't feel like I got 8. You want to know those for the exam. Okay, date marking. Ready to eat TCS food must be marked if it's held for longer than 24 hours. So if you're making a gumbo that you're going to serve tonight and it's going to be used tonight, then you don't have to label it. You're probably going to make it and then just keep it hot and serve all of it. But if you have leftovers and you're going to keep them, then you would have to label that. You need to have a date mark that indicates when the food must be sold, eaten, or thrown out. Ready-to-eat TCS food can be stored for only 7 days as long as it's held at 41 degrees or lower. And 7 days is a pretty long time in a restaurant. Any of that kind of food, you want to make sure that you're turning it over faster than 7 days. Day 1 is the day the food was prepared or a commercial container was opened. So for example, we made potato salad on October 1st. I'm using my fingers to do this. You start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So October 7th is the use by date. Today's date is August 31st. So we go 31, and then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So September 6th would be the date that we will put on as the discard date. Some places, actually most places, use the use the discard date, but some places also use the date that it was prepared, and then you've got to do the physical work or the mental work of figuring out when is 7 days from that. If commercially processed food has a use-by date that is less than 7 days from the date the container was opened, then the container should be marked with that use-by date, as long as the date is based on food safety. Some products will say best by this date. You can still use it after that date, but it has the highest quality before that date. But other foods have an expiration date, and you want to go strictly by that expiration date. If you're combining food with different use-by dates, base the discard date on the dish of the earliest use-by date in the ingredients. So they give us the example of shrimp and sausage jambalaya. Shrimp has a use-by date of December 8th. Sausage has a use-by date of December 10th. When you combine it and use it in the jambalaya has to be used by the time the shrimp would have to be used. Okay, so storage. We've received everything. Now we're going to store it. TCS food, time and temperature controlled for safety. It's got to either be below 41 degrees or above 135 degrees. Frozen foods you want to keep stored at temperatures that keep it frozen, and that's usually between 0 degrees and 10 degrees below 0. And that will keep your food frozen solid. Anybody ever lived somewhere where ice forms on top of ponds over the winter? Okay. It's got to get really cold. At 32 degrees, the ice doesn't start forming on the pond. It's got to go like probably at least 10 or 15 degrees below that before you're going to start to see the ice. So it's the same thing in the freezer. In order to keep things frozen solid, you want to keep them in like a deep freeze below 0. Make sure your storage units have at least one air temperature measuring device. So we've got a photograph of the internal thermometer. And I'm guessing this is in a cooler. So the red area starts at 41 degrees. So that's where the indicator is telling us now this cooler is above 41 degrees, so we have an issue. That thermometer should be placed in the warmest part of refrigerated units or in the coldest part of hot holding units. So this room, no windows, all sealed up. This was a walk-in cooler. Where would be the warmest place in this room? Okay, over at the door. Okay, because that's going to be our source of warm air. Would it be right by the door handle? Where would it be? Pardon me? By the light switch? Higher or lower? Higher is because warm air rises. So yeah, you would put it like maybe to the right of the door, up above the top of it. And that would tend to be the warmest place that you have in the cooler. In a hot holding unit, let me think if I can. A hot holding unit has shelves in it, heat source from the bottom. They have these things called sternos that you can put in there. The little you can light them there. It's got a chemical in it that it burns like a Bunsen burner would in the science lab. Or it can have like electric heating elements at the bottom of it. So that the heat is from the bottom and it goes up. If you have that thing filled up with food, where would the coolest part be? like 20 minutes after you loaded it. It's got different shelves, kind of like a refrigerator, but they're open shelves. So if you shove a bunch of food in there, the heat's coming from the bottom. Where would the coolest part be? And again, just like that case of the cream, it's going to be in the middle because that's the last place that the heat is going to get to, because heat naturally rises. So at the bottom, it's going to be hot and it'll rise up to the top until that heat actually gets into the center part. That's going to be the coolest part. So that's where you would check temperatures. Coolers and freezers, is important not to overload them. They work by having the air circulating freely around the products that are stored in it. So if you have everything jam-packed together and there's no space for air circulation, it's not going to hold the temperature. Frequent opening of the cooler lets warm air inside. That can affect your food safety. We use what's called open shelving in coolers and freezers that promotes air circulation. You want to monitor food temperatures regularly. You actually want to go in and check that something that's being stored in the cooler or the freezer is at the right temperature. Just randomly sample different food temperatures. Food is not at the correct temperature, then throw it out. So if I would check in the cooler, I found a gallon of milk and I put a thermometer in it and it was 50 degrees, that means I have to throw the milk out and then start checking other things to find out, why do I have warm milk? Is everything in this cooler warm, or did somebody leave it out and then try to get it back in the cooler? We have a rotation of food that we keep in inventory. It's called FIFO, which stands for first in, first out. So the stuff that's ready to expire, you want that in the front so that it gets used first. So you store that in the front. The health department actually looks at this kind of thing. I worked at a place called Beau Rivage in Biloxi, in a pastry kitchen, and we would routinely go through probably 40 gallons of milk a day, but we didn't have room to store 40 gallons of milk. So we would keep ordering it throughout the day to have it delivered. And the folks in the warehouse area did not rotate the dates on their milk. They just gave it us whatever they could reach. So then we would have to always go and make sure we might be getting something new in, but we might have something that's actually fresher already in the cooler. And the health department did check it every time. And then you got to train your staff. Use the stuff in front first. Any food that is past its manufacturer's use by or expiration date, you want to throw that out. Of course, you're in a business to make money, so you want to make sure that that product gets used. Preventing cross-contamination while things are stored. Okay, so you want everything to be stored in a designated storage area. So whether it's your dry storage room, your cooler, your freezer, you want items stored away from the walls and at least 6 inches off of the floor. You can see in the photograph, they've actually got like a line of tape on the floor that indicates where that rack should actually be standing. Why do we need that space of 6 inches off of the floor? Why would you think? Why don't we just have it go all the way down to the floor, or even 3 inches off of the floor? Pardon me? You walk on the floor and it's dirty. And actually that's Good, because the floor is dirty, and if something spills under it, you're not going to be able to see it if it's less than 6 inches. So you want to be able to clean under that. Store your single-use items, any kind of like disposable cups, lids, plastic forks, knives, and spoons. You're going to store them in their individual packaging or in their original packaging. You don't want to open them up and stack them outside of the packaging. You want to make sure you're storing food in containers that are intended for food. We're going to hear this, this word a lot about durable, leak-proof, and able to be sealed or covered. So if you think back to that picture of the salt, that plastic container is durable. It's got a lid made just for that container. Never use empty food containers to store chemicals. So you don't want to take like a container of oatmeal and put rat poison in it after it's empty. Somebody could confuse it. And then the other way around, you never ever put food into empty chemical containers. It might be a neat idea to have a spray bottle and like wash out a bottle of 409 and then put something in it that you want to spray on the food, which we've actually had a student do, but you can't do that. Keep all of your storage areas clean and dry. Anytime you have a spill of anything or a leak, you want to clean it up quickly. Clean dollies, carts, transporters, and trays often. Store food in containers that have already been cleaned and sanitized. Your dirty linens need to be in a clean, non-absorbent container or washable laundry bags. We have a service that takes care of the side towels, the cleaning towels that we have in the kitchen, and they give us a mesh bag so the air can get through and kind of let the stuff dry if they're wet. And then after the class is done, we take those outside and put them in a plastic bin to be picked up later. Preventing cross-contamination, you want to wrap or cover food. Store your raw meat, seafood, and poultry away from ready-to-eat foods. If that's not possible, store the ready-to-eat food above raw meat, seafood, and poultry. Okay, so there's definitely going to be a question about this on the exam. From top to bottom, you want to store your ready-to-eat food at the top. So your things like salads, lettuces, things that are not going to get cooked any further, you're just going to take them out and serve them. Next shelf would have seafood on it. In the middle, whole cuts of beef and pork. Under that, you would have ground meat or ground fish. And then always at the bottom, poultry, whether it's whole or ground, always at the bottom. And then if you go from bottom to top, that's actually going from the highest internal temperature you have to reach. So poultry has to reach 165, and then the other ones are lower than that. We'll cover that in another chapter. Foods also should be stored in a clean, dry location away from dust and other contaminants. So never store food in these areas, in locker rooms or dressing rooms. That's where dirty clothes are going to be. In restrooms or garbage rooms. in mechanical rooms. In a mechanical room is like right across the hall, there's a door that you all might walk by, and it doesn't have a window on it. And inside of it is like all the support for the computers and the internet in this building. And we've got another one that has air conditioning. And those are your mechanical rooms. So you don't store food, even if it's like a box of canned tomato paste, you don't store that in a mechanical room. Under unshielded sewer lines or leaking water lines, under stairwells, of course this building doesn't have any stairs, but it's not a place where you would store food. Handling damaged, spoiled, or incorrectly stored food. You want to discard any food that has become unsafe. So whether it was expired, it was damaged, spoiled, or incorrectly stored. Food that is missing a date mark. So if you're going through the cooler and you can see that, wow, this looks like gumbo, I wonder when it was made, and there's no label on it. You can't guess that it's going to be safe. Ready to eat TCS food that has exceeded its date mark. Food that has exceeded time temperature requirements. So if you left something out overnight, like if you meant to make hamburger patties and pull out ground meat and accidentally left it out overnight, you got to throw that away. If the food is going to be returned to the vendor, like in a recall, store that away from other food and equipment, and then label that food so that it's not used. Okay, so that's chapter 5. And that means that we're halfway through the text. The quiz for this chapter should be posted by tomorrow. And then make sure that you're going through and watching the lectures for the days that you're not here. If you have missed the quiz, email me. I think I extended most things until tonight for 1 through 4. But if there's another one that you missed, email me and I can extend it for you. Okay, have a good day.